why exactly do we have different subdivisions within a division? The answer was this, that look, you may have multiple patents coming out from each of these different divisions, but that does not mean that all of them would be equally successful. It is the iron law of Pareto, economics. Those of you who are aware, 80% of the times, things fail. It is those 20%, that would tend to give you a benefit not only for your return of investment, but over and above, so that you are able to reinvest and continue the cycle of investment and innovation. Coming back to again to SEPs. Now, when we take this issue to SEPs, the problem when we see it, is this. Whatever standards, were made, let's say GSM is 90s, 95, 2000 year technology. It is very recent. And we have, further refinements made on top of it. The point is that when we are looking at standard essential patents, once, the patents comes as part of the standard, it is guaranteed adoption. There is nothing that can stop the adoption of that particular patent. But problem is that everybody is declaring their patents to be standard essential. I have seen at the database, by multiple, parties, there are two, ETSI and TTA. And till date, I have not been able to tell precisely how many patent owners are there. There is no certainty from that respect. Sometimes people would say there are more than 150. Sometimes there are people, that say there are several studies that show that more than 2.5 lakh patents are there in one mobile phone. I'm not talking about standards, I'm talking about patents. Even if somebody has got one patent, we'll say fine, he's got a SEP, and we must honor the commitment. He must get a frank return for it. And what if that single patent owner would start to demand, a percentage of the end selling price? Now this brings me to another issue. The end selling price, let's say in a country like India, almost 30% are taxes. When you bring in a product from, let's say, China, you pay 12.5% of import duty. There are special additional duties. There are import taxes. Then you have the value addition tax that is there. Now, what is the logic? I fail to understand the logic behind, putting a percentage based on the end value of the device and taxes. What is the relationship between them? I have not been able to understand. Similar is the case with, let's say, marketing costs. When let's say I have a mobile phone and I brand it under my name, Rajiv's mobile phone, and you have your own mobile phone and you brand it under your name. No, I don't see the relationship between the patent and that particular brand as such. So in that respect, SEP owners, if the demand is onerous, it can really throttle the entire industry. Finally, the last point that I would make is that, as Mr. Mohendra was saying, that India has a demographic dividend. And in the words of our PM, I would echo the words of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. The patent owner should be guaranteed a fair return, but it should be such that the poorest of the poor of this country can also afford that particular technology. After all, that is the idea of, technology, that it has to uplift the value to the poor. Today we have, our rickshaw pullers, our milk vendor, our newspaper vendor, everybody has a mobile phone. Tomorrow, if I'm getting demands from, let's say, different SEP owners saying that you give me a percentage, I will have no option but to pass on that demand to those of them. For you and me, it should be okay, no problem, we can afford that. But for them, they will not be able to afford it. And which is why, again, Mr. Mohendra, talked about demographic dividend. You multiply a percentage by 100 crores, and you multiply that same percentage or with 1 crores or 20 crores, you see the difference. You will, in India, if you apply it rationally, you will definitely get the more dividend, provided you are able to create that ecosystem and let everybody foster together, everybody grow with the SEP owner as well. Thank you.
Actually, I am realizing I should have two teams, one on the side of SEP and one on the side of the common person. And with this, going to the next speaker panelist, Mr. Rajiv Bhatnagar, Director Technical and Senior Patent Engineer, Mrs. Anand and Anand, attorney firm.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rajiv Bhatnagar, and I'm a technical person, and I work for a law firm. So I'd like to start as a good law firm employee with a disclaimer. And there's a disclaimer there in invisible ink. It says that whatever is said is disclaimed. So please don't hold me responsible for what I say here. I would also like to not venture into the territory that my co-panelists have ventured, and that's for three reasons. One is, again, as a law firm, I wish to avoid controversy. Number two, I believe that the most important issues, which have already been covered, if I were to cover them again, it's not interesting. And number three, I think there's another perspective which I think is more important for innovators. And having been an innovator in a previous life, I think I can kind of relate to that. And I'd like to bring that to the table and see what that says. And that's what my presentation will try to speak about. So let's start. So let's start with standards. Let's forget patents for a moment and let's talk about patents and how they relate to ICT. Standards and ICT appear to be inseparable. A very large number of standards are involved, covering many, many different functions and features. So that's a fact of life in ICT. And there are several standard development organizations. There's some names up there, some international, some regional, and so on. So that's just some facts. There are wide-ranging technology areas within the ICT space. So there is communication, there is computing, there's a whole lot of stuff there. And there are many standards that are considered mandatory, or at least de facto mandatory for certain defined functions and features. However, not all functions or features described are mandatory for implementation in a particular technology space, and there are multiple that we are talking about in the ICT space. Then let's look at patents in ICT and forget standards for a moment. And we say this technology space is driven by innovation. It's flooded with patents. There are several 100,000 patents that are spoken of. My colleague just spoke of several 100,000. And it's one of the fastest growing patent spaces in terms of filings. I think people in the morning have also repeated that feature. A large number of these patents are actually what we term as improvement patents. They build on earlier patents. So that's an important fact to bear in mind. The fast pace of patent growth, that means patents are coming in very rapidly. So there are older patents, and there are the new patents. So there has to be a coexistence of active original on which we base the new patents and the improvement patents themselves. And because of that coexistence, there is an issue of interdependence. So one patent, the new one, depends on an earlier one, and what are the legal rights of using the new patent? Can we use it or not? And what is the impact of the new patent on the business? When we talk of developing new patents, creating new patents, let's bear this in mind, that the new patents that we make, more often than not, will be improvement patents and will therefore coexist or have to coexist at least for some time with the original ones. Now we come to SEPs. These are those special category patents that underlie one or more standards, and implementation of one or more sections of the standards. It's generally not that the whole standard is mapped to one patent. It's several patents mapping onto a standard, and it demands, certain sections will demand the use of a certain patent. And SEPs become unavoidable for implementing certain features that we all know. And several SEPs will cover one standard. So it's an N:1 relationship. So when I'm talking of conforming to a standard, I'm talking of conforming to several patents. And sometimes a single SEP may span parts of multiple standards as well. That also happens. So it can be the other way around. 1:N. SEPs and innovation. Most innovations will be based on functions which are covered by one or more standards. So whatever improvements you do, more likely than not, will be mapping onto some standard or the other, or will be trying to enhance a standard perhaps. As a result, it will run up against existing SEPs, and we'll have these rights to use, licensing, all these issues will pop up. And how aware of all are we of all these? There's so many of these standards, there's so many of these patents. When we do something new, do we know which standards, which patents are going to be involved that we have to care about? If the innovation is fundamental, if this new thing I've done is vital to my business, this knowledge of awareness becomes vital to my business. And how am I going to get it? Because I want to be a law-abiding citizen. I don't want to be one of those pirates. So I need to know where I am stepping on somebody's toes, and then to take action to not step on the toe. Now, there are certain inherent features of SEPs and ITs that, let's look at the positive side. So SEPs also, because of the value they bring, because they're so important, there are also great opportunities for innovation. So I should maybe actively pursue that innovation which can become an SEP. So if I can identify white spaces or trends in the standard space, then I can identify opportunities for targeting innovation. And by playing an active role in SDOs, I can also facilitate marketing of such white space innovations. So that can be a goal, perhaps, for innovators. Participation in SDOs also solves the initial problem I spoke of. It brings awareness of what is the SAP space like, where are the traps, where are the pitfalls. So that can be an action item for innovators to try and get that awareness to help them avoid the pitfalls which are so vital for their business. What happened? It doesn't move forward. Okay. It's not opening. Okay, if I look at the innovation trends in ICT, so just a list of some of the spaces is computing, image processing, security, data storage, encoding, power management, media, communication types, protocols. There's a whole lot of technology spaces that go into today's ICT products. Each of these is an independent domain filled with standards, patterns, and SEPs. Some of the functions will overlap and interplay. Mass market products carry high business risk. Many of the ICT products are mass market. The products are also in very highly competitive markets. There is also the issue of cross-border implementation. The cloud, the internet brings in these issues. There's also cross-border development happening. There are multiple development teams in different geographies which are interacting. And there are a lot of diverse legal and commercial environments which are involved, therefore. So all this adds up. The point I'm going to make is a complex scenario. If you look at the emerging business trends, there's globalization, resulting emphasis on IPR rights being respected. There's also India's emergence as one of the largest and fastest growing markets for ICT. So that's the other side of it. Looking at all this, and the thrust that is based on ICT because of the initiatives, the Digital India initiative, smart cities, and so on. So all this also has to enter the picture. And now the implications of all this for innovators. There are many increasing opportunities for innovation and for developing business, but there's also a growing demand for carrying out these activities in conformance to unfamiliar constraints that enhance business risk. And these new constraints require a new set of awareness and a new skill set. And for patent professionals like me, there's a traditional approach of evaluating business risks, which is the so-called freedom to operate. It's not very effective anymore because of the complexities that I just spoke of, the very diverse technology spaces, the plethora of standards and patents and so on. It's not the simple FTO exercise that could be applied to other technology spaces. So we need a different approach to cater to these increased complexities. So these are the thoughts that I came up with, and I think these are issues that need to be addressed. I don't think we are doing anything to address these, but I think they are vital. I just want to make one other comment. If I take an analogy, in ICT, we are moving at a very fast pace. So the analogy is I'm driving in a car, and I'm going fast, right? Now, there's two ways. The Indian way, there are no rules. You try and go fast, so you switch lanes, and you have traffic jams. So you end up not going fast. and you had conflicts, you have accidents, whatever. The other way is you follow the lanes and you do it the way it's done in the West and you zip along. So we'd like to follow the lanes, that means follow the rules, respect everybody else's rights, not butt into somebody else's area, and then move quickly. How we do that is for us to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatnagar. Now I request Mr. Sarnil, Principal Director, EPO. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for choosing for this session. I would like to talk about the practice that we have at the EPO when we are dealing with standards-related prior art. To do so, I would like to give you an example of a long time ago to show you how the development of addressing prior art in our office developed. This is a Danish patent application to salvage sunken ships from the bottom of the sea. And the inventor, that was a Danish inventor, he proposed to push plastic particles that are expendable into a sunken ship to lift it up to the surface of the sea. Now there was, that was at a time in 1965 when patents in Europe had to be applied for in every single country, so before the EPO actually existed. And here, it was a Danish applicant who went to Holland to get his patent. The Dutch had a very good patent documentation. It was all paper, stored in shoe boxes. And the patent examiner came up with a piece of prior art, which was published in time. It was a Walt Disney cartoon whereby the nephews of Donald Duck are pushing ping pong balls through a hose, also to a sunken ship to get it to lift it off from the bottom of the sea. Now, this time is far behind us, although it was in fact the reality that patent examiners at the EPO, also in the beginning time, when we started in the late 70s, early 80s, were in fact using paper documentation, and probably also this piece of prior art was still in our archives. But we have gone a long way to change that. We are now dealing with highly specialized electronic databases, which are mainly divided up in patents and non-patent literature. And in order to access these patents and non-patent literature, we have to do that very organized, using specialized classification symbols in order to access pieces of prior art. That is in order to perform searches quickly and efficiently. It was mentioned already this morning that efficiency is important, that we want to keep the prices of patents as low as possible. But also we want to deliver as good a quality as possible, whereby quality for us is in fact means that if we're granting a patent, the patent should be legally valid, it should stand in court when it is contested. And also to be cost effective, we have to rely to these highly structured electronic databases. Now, 15 years ago there was a new generation of examiners coming to the EPO who said, yeah, but we are still missing a very important piece of prior art if we are dealing with standard-related patent applications. And that is the literature that is made available by standard issuing, standard setting organizations, SDOs or SSOs as they are called. As maybe you know, a lot of literature is handled during these sessions of the standard setting organizations. They have working groups in which certain standards are discussed, and there are input and output documents. And the question was, can you use these documents already to assess prior art? If you look to the definition of prior art, it said that prior art shall comprise everything made available to the public by means of written or oral description, by use or in any other way, before the date of filing of the European patent application. Now, the question was, is the documents and the information that is handled by standard setting organizations, is that publicly available? The word public was important there. a position was what was held by the European Patent Office, that they said yes, everybody can become member of a standard setting organization, and any interested party can have access to this documentation. So therefore, you have to consider it as public. Some people say still, no, these meetings are not public in the sense that you have access to it, or sometimes also agreements about confidentiality exist. So there was an unclear area there where we did not know how to deal with. A gray zone between the publicly available prior art and the non-publicly available, maybe secret information. The practice in Europe is normally to consider the normal standard development processes as non-confidential. For example, contrary to America, where documents dealt with in standard setting organizations are not considered as prior art. However, we had to clarify this gray zone by talking with the people who are setting the standards, the standard setting organizations, by making mutual agreements about what was actually available. For that, we engaged in a process of contacting these organizations and making memoranda of understanding about what can be used as prior art. And that has resulted in that we have now 2.3 million standards-related documents into our databases, which are directly searchable by examiners. That was not an obvious task because very often these documents were not dated or there was no author known, and we had to put it in a certain format to make it searchable, to have access in a good way. The big advantage is that these standard-related documents are often much more earlier available than when the patent actually is published or when the standard is issued. So we have an advantage in time, and we find much relevant prior art and can ensure better quality of our patents. That is the most important process, in fact. I mean, the patents, especially the standard essential patents, are very valuable patents. So if we miss prior art, which shows them up later on, we would miss really important prior art. In certain fields, up to 40% of what we are citing is standard related, and we have, as I mentioned, the advantage of having the early disclosure. Here again, I emphasize that we had to engage in the process of talking with the standard setting organizations to get memoranda of understanding and agreements between these organizations to confirm that the documentation could be used as prior art, and also to allow us access to the standards presentation. We have agreements in place with a couple of organizations that are listed here, and we are still in process with many